Hello, this is Bryce Marquis. I'm here starting off the presentation with my partners Jing Han and Jennifer Naylor. We're going to be discussing the final revision of the Common Rule, which was put out by HHS in January of 2017. And just to set things up a little bit, we're going to be focusing on not everything that was changed, but really what we view to be the most important changes relevant to the clinical work that we're interested in. And also, we are not going to be discussing the whole series of other changes that were proposed, but ultimately that were not implemented. I wanted to provide a little bit of background on the Common Rule before we discuss the changes and final revisions. The Common Rule is really a series of regulations that was established in 1991 for the protection of human subjects in research. And to simplify it into its most important components, there's really two parts that we focus on a lot, and that's the informed consent process for human research subjects to participate in medical research, and also it also provides a framework for review of this research by institutional review boards, which you're all familiar with at this point. So the first question, of course, is what about the Common Rule as it was instituted in 1991 makes it insufficient for today? There's been really a massive volume in the amount of clinical research since 1991, and also the complexity of this research. And it's made certain aspects of the Common Rule sort of cumbersome as it tries to deal with this increased volume. There's also increased prevalence of social science studies in human research, and much of the Common Rule is really tailored more for medical research, and so some of the oversight it is not as compatible with the social science aspects. And technological improvements such as electronic medical records really greatly increase the access and distribution of information, as well as advanced analytical techniques. Think about omics, genomics, and such, allows for much more information to be obtained from stored biospecimens. And so there really needs to be some thought about what happens to the information or specimens after the study is completed, and if more information is wanted out of it. And I just put these dates down here, these years down here, just to emphasize that this has been a long process. Starting in 2011, a notice was put out saying that they were going to proposing making some new rules, and the proposed new rules came in 2015, where there was a public comment period, and the final revisions were finally put into place in 2017 after that public commenting period. I wanted to give a brief overview of the changes that we're going to be discussing that were present in the final revisions of the Common Rule. The two I've highlighted here first, the two that I'm going to be discussing. The first is an improved informed consent process for increased subject understanding. And the second will be an allowance of the use of broad consent for secondary studies on biospecimens and private information. Jing will be discussing the requirement of consent forms to be posted on public websites, and the use of a single IRB review for cooperative research. Well, Jennifer will be talking about the way that the revisions tried to match the IRB review intensity to the risk associated with research, and the elimination of the continual review for minimal risk research. Even in the original version of the Common Rule, there was a highlighted importance of subject understanding throughout the informed consent process. For example, they require the use of language that subjects can understand in informed consent forms, and they wanted the informed consent forms to withhold exculpatory language in order to sort of keep the document as clear as possible. However, over time, we've become aware that this guidance is insufficient for this means. Forms have grown complex and long over time, and they tend to focus too much on protecting institutions. And there's more guidance is needed to improve the informed consent process with a focus on subject understanding. A lot of this is driven by sort of a philosophical idea that research subjects should be viewed as partners in research, and so the informed consent forms and process must be really streamlined with the idea of helping them making the most informed decision about whether they want to or don't want to participate in the research. There were a number of additions to the common rule found in the final revisions that were aimed at improving the informed consent process for subject understanding. So here, the subsection 116A4, subjects must be provided with the information that a reasoned person would want to have to make a decision about whether they want to participate in research or not, along with an opportunity to discuss. 116A5, 1. Informed consent must begin with a concise and focused presentation of key information on reasons one might or might not want to participate in the study. And overall, the form must be organized and presented in a way to facilitate comprehension. So this, again, we're talking about an initial first page where the key information is really provided to the subjects, or potential subjects, and that is organized in a way to facilitate comprehension. And again, this was really important to them because they highlighted again at a second subsection they added where they said that they want to further emphasize that the information organization in the form, so what they're talking about is the way you present it in terms of highlighting sections, presenting the sections, should not really be merely a list of isolated facts, but should facilitate the prospective subject's understanding of the reasons why one might or might not want to participate in the research. So, as I move into my second topic, this topic deals with secondary research on stored biospecimens or data. So, before I discuss this concept of broad consent, I wanted to discuss the concept of secondary research. So we're all familiar at this point with what a sort of traditional research project involves: a researcher coming up with an idea, submitting a protocol to the IRB for approval, and then they can become recruiting subjects. Subjects go through the informed consent process with the researcher, and then the study is done. At the end of the study, you have biospecimens or data, and that is stored for later analysis. But the concept of secondary analysis comes into a very typical situation that happens in science because we don't know all the answers and we don't know what's going to happen when we conduct our experiments. Oftentimes, we have another question that comes out of that data. And at that point, we might want to go back to some of that data that has been stored, or maybe we have some biospecimens that are also left over that are stored, and we want to ask a different question, maybe do a different analysis. And so the question arises at that point is, do you need to go ahead and resubmit a research proposal and go through this whole process again? Or can you simply go back and look at the biospecimens or data that you have stored? Well, if you want to go back and avoid this whole long process of approval and getting your data, you use a process known as broad consent, and that is what these changes to the common rule that I'm going to be discussing. So just to provide more of a concrete example, let's say that you were testing a new clinical drug, and during this process, you go through the regular IRB process. You discover when you're testing it that the drug has unusual response on one subset of research subjects, and you suspect that this might arise from a shared genetic trait in this group of subjects, and you would like to perform genomic analysis on the subjects to investigate. This comes in, commonly there's a lot of discussion of personalized medicine, and so this could be potentially something interesting if you were interested in developing some personalized medicine studies or protocols. Well, this would be a secondary study, and so unless you had broad consent to perform these studies, you couldn't go back and use those biospecimens that you obtained from your subjects in order to conduct a second study. And so so the changes in the common rule were really made to help facilitate this by providing some more concrete requirements for what is needed for broad consent. So broad consent addresses consent issues regarding storage, maintenance, and secondary research use of identifiable biospecimens and private information. And one of the key words here is identifiable biospecimens and private information. So identifiable. So if you have non-identifiable biospecimens or private information, then you don't need broad consent to continue. So in order to deal with this, a new subsection was added to the common rule. This included additional requirements on the types of information for broad consent. So types of information that need to be there for broad consent. So this is all in addition to what would be considered required for specific study consent. So in addition to that, for broad consent, you need to include a description of the types of secondary research that may be conducted on the biospecimen or private information. You need to talk about the types of information or biospecimens that will be stored for later use and the length of time that they will be stored. And you would need to include whether the subject will be informed of the use of their information or biospecimens in secondary research. And additionally, this requires that contact information be collected in order to provide broad consent in case you need to contact those research subjects for future uses. So I'm going to end my portion here, and Jing is going to pick up with some more issues involving informed consent. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce, for the nice presentation. I will continue his topic to talk about the other change made on consent. The major change is requiring that consent form for certain federally funded clinical trial be posted on a public website within 6 days after the trial is closed for recruitment. This slide shows the detail of the language that has been added to the new policy. So what are the impacts of the change on research practice? First, it improves the quality of the consent forms. The regulations that requires posting consent form on federal website will increase transparency and accountability of the consent forms, which will drive the individuals responsible for writing the consent form to write more informative and meaningful ones. This also enhances confidence in the research enterprise. Second, it provides study resources. Making the consent form publicly available could provide a resource of examples as well as a research tool for individuals who are interested in studying consent forms and inform the development of future consent forms. Where the goal is to improve consent forms by increasing transparency, this change could lead to unintended consequences that will avert achieving this goal. The possibility and fear of public scrutiny may encourage investigators to draft more informative consent forms, but it may also drive investigators, institutions, and IRBs to defensively add more language that protects against their liability, which result in the producing unduly long documents that are difficult to understand. Another unintended consequence is the possibility to get IRB in trouble. The purpose of IRB review is to assure protection of rights and welfare of humans participating as subjects in research. The public's negative reaction to certain consent forms may encourage subjects to sue IRB that approve the form, spurring more litigation. Next, I'm going to talk about the change made in cooperative research. Cooperative research projects are those projects covered by this policy which involve more than one institution. The previous language states that with the approval of the department or agency head, an institution participating in a cooperative project may enter into a joint review arrangement, rely upon the review of another qualified IRB, or make similar arrangements for avoiding duplication of effort. The significant change made in this part is requiring single IRB review for cooperative research for some studies. In the new policy, it states that any institution located in the United States that is engaged in cooperative research must rely upon approval by a single IRB for that portion of the research that is conducted in the United States. The review IRB will be identified by the federal department or agency supporting or conducting the research, or proposed by the lead institution subject to the acceptance of the federal department or agency supporting the research. Where the new rules applies to most of the clinical studies, there are some exceptions. As added in the new policy, the following research is not subjected to this provision. First is cooperative research, for which more than single IRB review is required by law, including tribal law passed by the official governing body of an American Indian or Alaska Native tribe, or research for which any federal department or agency supporting or conducting the research determines and documents that the use of a single IRB is not appropriate for the particular context. As opposed to the old way of each investigator seeking single IRB approval from their respective institution, multi-site studies are now required to use only a central IRB according to the new policy. This part of the regulation will go into effect in 3 years, that is, January 2020. Will the changes have any impact on research practice? First, let's talk about the drawback of the old one. The major bottleneck of the old way is the delay in the launch of a new multi-site clinical research study. As we know that in the past, most clinical research studies were carried out at single institutions. To help increase the number and diversity of the participants, improve operational efficiencies, and accelerate the generation of research results, now studies are increasingly conducted at multi-site. For the majority of the multi-site study, the IRB at each site continued to conduct an independent review, which adds the review time, but generally does not meaningfully enhance protection for human beings. The involving of too many IRBs results in the delay in the study approval and launch. The new policy using single IRB review for cooperative research carried out at multi-sites in the United States will encourage standardization of clinical research protocols and more effective implementation of protocols and protocol amendments. Also will enhance and streamline the IRB review process in the context of multi-site research, so that research can proceed as effectively and expeditiously as possible. Accelerating clinical research study will eventually benefit researchers, research participants, and all those stand to gain from research results. The new policy using single IRB review for cooperative research carried out at multi-site in the United States will encourage standardization of clinical research protocols and more effective implementation of protocols and protocol amendments. Also will enhance and streamline the IRB review process in the context of multi-site research, so that research can proceed as effectively and expeditiously as possible. Accelerating clinical research study will eventually benefit researchers, research participants, and all those stand to gain from research results. Where the new policy benefits the research investigator, it has some challenge for IRB. As I mentioned in the previous slide, the purpose of IRB review is to evaluate the potential benefits of the research and risk to participants, assure protecting the right of human subjects in research. It plays a critical role in review and approving studies involving human research participants. For single IRB to work effectively, certain capabilities are needed. For example, knowledge of state law and local standards relevant to human subject research, system and procedures for collecting information from participating sites in order to ascertain whether the research could feasibly be carried out at the site, mechanisms in place to assess the experience and qualifications of site investigators and study staff, appropriate expertise and experience to review the proposed research and the capability to review the study protocol. Sufficient staff to handle communications between all sides for initial review, continued review, adverse events, and amendment. Up next, Jennifer will discuss changes related to risk review in the updated Common Rule.
As we've previously mentioned, the changes to the Common Rule were proposed as a way to facilitate research and reduce burden, delay, and ambiguity for investigators. These changes aim to simplify and modernize the current system as needed. The two final rule changes that I will focus on are the elimination of continuing review for certain minimal risk research and the establishment of new exempt categories of research based on level of risk posed to subjects. Both topics I will describe deal with minimal risk research. Minimal risk research means that the probability and magnitude of harm or discomfort anticipated in the research are not greater in and of themselves than those ordinarily encountered in daily life or during the performance of routine physical or psychological examinations or tests. For example, the collection of blood samples from adults and children within normal limits is considered to be minimal risk. Now that I have described what minimal risk research means, the first change to the Common Rule I'll talk about is in reference to continuing review. In the Common Rule, the original language stated that IRBs are to conduct continuing review of research covered by this policy at intervals appropriate to the degree of risk but not less than once per year. The major change in the final rule is that continuing review is eliminated for many minimal risk studies, specifically those that are only eligible for expedited review, reviewed using IRB limited review procedure, or research that only involves data analysis. An important aspect of this that was done with the consideration of the subject's protection in mind, it was that continuing review is deemed unnecessary unless a clear benefit to the subjects could be shown. In the Common Rule, levels of IRB review included full board, expedited, and exempt. The exempt level was one that was not subject to federal regulations, and only specific categories of research were considered to be exempt, such as less than minimal risk, or fits into one of 6 defined exempt categories. In the Common Rule, these exempt categories included research in education settings, research using educational tests, collection or study of existing data, evaluation of public services or programs, and taste and food quality evaluation. The final rule maintained the original categories of exempt research but added new ones as well. Newly exempt categories must meet certain conditions. They must be research for which consent is not required. They are required to have limited IRB review, or broad consent for use of information is not required. Limited IRB review still protects the subject's autonomy in all of these cases. Two examples of exempt research studies include taking a survey of the opinions of graduate students about the course curriculum of their program, or analysis of de-identified MRI datasets. However, as I've mentioned previously, a limited IRB review is still required to ensure that privacy safeguards are in place and that private or identifiable information is still protected. In conclusion, the new guidelines for continuing review and exemption categories allow for more flexibility for research projects, as well as more rapid transition to data analysis and reporting, while still protecting the human subject's rights. Thank you for listening to our presentation today, and please feel free to ask us any questions regarding changes of the Common Rule to becoming the Final Rule.